Welcome to The Debate. Today we're grappling with one of the most astonishing periods of expansion in all of history, the rise of the early Arab Empire. Within a century it spanned 3 continents, growing to something like 13.4 million square kilometers, just an enormous territory.
And the sheer speed and scale of it really forces you to ask the fundamental question, what was the true engine of this success? Was it, this monumental conquest that was primarily a consequence of the new unifying ideology provided by the nascent Islamic faith?
Or, as I'm going to argue, was the Islamic ideology the driving and frankly the essential factor, the internal engine that gave it the structure it needed to build a lasting state from all these fragmented tribes? I really think this ideology was the prerequisite for turning, a regional opportunity into a historical destiny.
And I'm going to argue for almost the opposite. While the new faith was, of course, a powerful organizing force, no one denies it, the rise of the Arab Empire was mostly enabled by geopolitical and economic conditions. You had exhausted superpowers next door, critical trade routes shifting, the opportunities were material. The religion was the perfect banner to seize them, but the real push was external.
Well, my core claim really centers on that internal transformation. The success for me lay in the complete socio-political structure that Islam provided. It acted like a comprehensive operating system, if you will. Before Muhammad, the Arabian Peninsula was basically chaos, poverty, constant tribal conflict over the tiniest resources, water, a bit of grazing land. And the spiritual landscape was just as fragmented. You had the 360 idols in the Kaaba and Mecca, each tied to a different clan.
I see that initial instability, but I think I come at the solution from a different angle.
While Muhammad successfully replaced that entire multi-theistic tribal structure with a single unifying monotheistic belief in Allah. That was the essential revolutionary step for any kind of state consolidation. And the Quran, it provided an instant legal and governmental code. We're talking over 500 rules on everything from ethics and war to commerce and taxes. This allowed for the immediate transformation of these scattered communities into a cohesive political body. This was first codified with the Ummah in Medina, the unified community, which was really the first legal charter of the new state. It's an ideological act that created a political system.
That's a compelling case for the internal capacity, I'll give you that. But it almost treats the rest of the world as if it were just a static background. I argue the Arab Empire was a direct response to these overwhelming geopolitical and economic pressures that were coming from outside the peninsula. We just can't overlook the fact that for more than a century leading up to this, the 2 regional superpowers, the Byzantine Empire and Persia's Sassanian Empire, had been mutually exhausting each other. Just constant draining warfare, especially over control of trade, like the route through Yemen.
That explains the vacuum, yes, but not the sudden ability of a brand new power to fill it so systematically.
Conflicts, they seriously disrupted the traditional, safer trade routes, the Persian Gulf, the Red Sea, the Nile. This forced international commerce onto the safer Western Arabian route, and that put Mecca
right at the center.
Exactly. Smack in the middle of international trade and wealth, giving it this powerful, centralized economic base. And then critically, you have the collapse of the Himyarite kingdom in South Arabia, which was devastated by these foreign wars. That caused a mass migration north, which only intensified the tribal feuds and created this widespread, desperate longing for a strong, unified government to just restore order. Muhammad arrived to fill a very powerful, pre-existing political demand.
So you see the ideology more as a function of economic need, not a spiritual revolution?
At least initially, absolutely. Let's focus on the commercial roots for a second. The text says Islam was, quote, born from and served commerce. And if you look at the early converts, they were often young merchants. The Quran actually elevates their status, gives them a sacred role. And Muhammad's own initial financial stability, the time he needed for reflection, that was secured by his marriage to the wealthy merchant Khadijah. It really suggests the early movement was an economic consolidation project that just, intelligently adopted a powerful monotheistic banner to hold it all together.
I fully acknowledge the commercial side of Mecca. Of course, any successful movement needs an economic engine. But the core of my argument about ideology rests on that moment of radical sacrifice. Think about the Hijra in 622, the flight from Mecca to Medina. That breakaway was necessary precisely because the new monotheistic ideology was a fundamental threat to the established polytheists who are profiting enormously from all 360 of those idols in the Kaaba.
But was the threat purely ideological, or was it economic?
I think it was ideological, because Muhammad was prepared to flee his comfortable life, his commercial success. The faith had to actively challenge and literally flee the existing commercial power structure to achieve its ultimate goal of unification. It was an ideological choice that, temporarily sacrificed commercial interests. And that move galvanized the faithful. It proved the ideology was the superior loyalty.
I'd argue that flight was a political necessity. It happened when the powerful aristocracy refused to give up their financial interests. The revenue tied to the pilgrimages for all those idols. So yes, it became an ideological conflict, but its foundation was a fight over the economic power structure. The ideology was just the most effective tool to rally the non-elites against the ruling merchants.
I'm just not convinced that an economic struggle alone can explain unifying all these disparate warring tribes under a single banner. I mean, that's a monumental feat. It required more than just shared resentment. It required a cohesive organizational framework. And that brings us directly to the military success after unification. The sheer military capability and the coordinated political machine that the Rashidun caliphates deployed immediately, that to me demonstrates the superiority of the new Islamic system. They weren't just opportunists, they were highly organized from day one.
Okay, if we're going to talk about organization, let's talk about the speed of the conquest, which is where the external factors become undeniable. I just don't buy that the internal structure alone explains it. I mean, within the 2-year reign of Abu Bakr and the first few years of Umar, the entire 1,200-year-old Sassanian Persian Empire was defeated. By 642, they had seized Egypt and Cairo.
And you think that speed automatically discounts their internal capacity?
I think that kind of speed is an unmistakable sign of a critical military advantage that was enabled by the geopolitical exhaustion of their rivals. No newly formed state, I don't care how well organized, defeats a millennium-old empire in just a few years unless that empire is already hollowed out, bankrupt, fighting with conscripts. The Muslim armies were effective, sure, but they were punching through tissue paper. The speed tells me more about the overwhelming external vulnerability than it does about the inherent strength of a brand new state.
The exhaustion of the rivals was certainly a necessary condition, I'll grant you that. It created the opportunity. But I would argue it wasn't a sufficient one. I mean, exhausted empires usually just fragment into chaos or warlordism. They don't typically get systematically absorbed and governed by a single new state. To conquer and then govern such a vast territory requires more than just successful raids. It requires a robust, clearly defined system of taxation, of military recruitment, of law, which the Quran and the Caliphate provided instantly. That instantaneous ability to administer diverse lands, that is the ideological miracle.
But this administration was built on expansion. The early empire was built on forceful military and political expansion. Muhammad wasn't just a prophet, he was an incredibly successful military commander, something like 65 campaigns in his 10 years in Medina. This highlights that the religious doctrine, specifically the concept of jihad, became the effective, glorious justification for war. It functioned primarily as a political and military tool to rally warriors and consolidate the state. The unification happened through the sword, and it was justified by the doctrine.
That's a compelling argument for the initial trigger. Force certainly played a huge role, but you have to consider what held it all together for centuries afterward. Force might start an expansion, but only a cohesive shared ideology can sustain it over such a massive, diverse area. If it were just an opportunistic military raid, the empire would have fractured as soon as the first few caliphs died.
Or what sustained it was centralized wealth, not just ideology.
No. Look at the stability of the later Umayyad, and especially the Abbasid caliphates. The high point of culture and learning under figures like Harun al-Rashid, who built the House of Wisdom. This centuries-long stability shows that the shared ideological bond, the clear system of governance, that was the glue necessary to sustain a multi-ethnic empire long after that initial geopolitical opportunity was gone. The system was robust enough to foster intellectual growth,
not just military expansion.
Well, while the ideology certainly served as the superstructure for that later cultural flowering, we still have to trace the initial success back to material conditions. The empire wasn't founded because they needed a house of wisdom. It was founded in the geopolitical vacuum created by mutual imperial destruction and the economic necessity that focused wealth and power in Mecca. The later cultural flourishing of the Abbasids is a testament to the wealth and stability they inherited from those conquered provinces. The ideology was the necessary, sophisticated delivery mechanism for the opportunity.
I would challenge the idea that the ideology was merely a delivery mechanism. Many groups have inherited wealth from collapsed empires. Very few have managed to turn that into such a durable, revolutionary system that it fundamentally transforms the religious, legal, and political landscape of half the known world. The ideological singularity of Islam and the detailed socio-political system from the Quran, those were the essential keys that unlocked the potential for statehood. Without that ideological structure, the opportunity would have just been filled by chaos, not cohesion.
I'm sorry, I just don't buy that the internal transformation was the primary cause. The Arab Empire was the right force arriving at the exact historical moment when two superpowers had neutralized each other and trade had already created a demand for unification in Arabia. The opportunities were profoundly material. The religion served as the perfect banner and framework to seize them. The historical push was external, with ideology acting as a highly efficient transmission.
It's clear we continue to place our emphasis on different points of causality, the internal architecture versus the external opportunity. But it is undeniable that both sides of this equation were extraordinary.
Indeed. And I think this whole phenomenon highlights a crucial point. The forces that drive such monumental change are rarely, if ever, singular. When a powerful ideology meets a perfect material opportunity in a moment of crisis, the result is the foundation of one of history's greatest empires.
And understanding that intricate interplay between that deep ideological transformation and the timely material necessity is absolutely crucial for appreciating the foundation and the lasting legacy of the early Arab Empire. There is certainly much more to explore in how that initial framework evolved over time to govern such a diverse realm.